I want to share with you a tool in Photoshop for repairing keystoning, and it's called the perspective correction. I understand not all of you have Photoshop, but I wanted to show you this procedure so that you understand that these things can be corrected. I'm sure you've taken a photo that ended up looking like this, especially in photos of buildings. They look like they're leaning backwards. This is called keystoning, and it's because the building and the camera lens are on two different angles. So unless you climb up really high, you're not going to get the proper angle, and so we get this tilting of the camera, and it's giving us this distortion in the buildings. I want to note also I do have this tutorial located under resources, so if you want to step through it on your own and print it, you certainly can. All right, so let's start here. First of all, I have this photo, and we're going to duplicate the background. So before we do anything, we need to make a copy of the original. Always a good idea when you are editing your photography to work off of a copy. Don't ever destroy your original. So we can do this in a couple different ways. For those that know Photoshop, I can take my layer and I can drag it over top of my new layer icon. I can also go under the layer menu at the top and choose to duplicate the layer, or I can use a keyboard command or Control J, and that will also make a copy. So now that I have a copy of my background layer, and it's going to be called layer 1, I am going to turn off my background for safekeeping. And make sure you have layer 1, the active layer. So now we're working on this copy. We're going to bring up the lens correction filter that Photoshop has to offer. Under the filter menu, I'm going to choose lens correction. If you're working with an older version of Photoshop, you may find it under the distort category. If it's CC, you're going to find it right there under the filter menu called lens correction. When I select that, I get a new dialog box, or a new window opens up and really takes over my entire screen. This is the lens correction dialog box. It has a few tools along the left side, a large preview area there in the middle, and then some options for correcting the lens problems along the right. So to start with, we need to make sure that our image is straight. So we do that using the straightening tool. Second tool from the top on the left. Straighten tool. So what I'm going to do is, by clicking to select that tool, I'm going to click and drag across something in the image that I think is straight. Again, you might not be able to see this very well. May have to zoom in a little bit. So what do I see that's straight, either horizontally or vertically? Okay, well, it looks like maybe my roof line over on the left or the right, the roof line might be straight. Vertically right in the center, that large column above the main door might be straight. So I think I'm going to go with the roof right here. I'm going to click and make this be my straight area. So when I release the mouse button, Photoshop rotates the image to straighten it if it was crooked. In my case, I think that it made it worse. I'm going to hold down my Alt or my Option key. When I do that, I get a reset. That will reset back to what I started with. So I can now try this once again. Let's try this straight up and down right here. Now, maybe a little better. I'm not sure I still like that. I think I'm going to just go with it how it was. I don't have to drag very long. I can drag something that's fairly short as well. Let's try. Nope, not liking it. Let's undo. Okay, we're going to stay with what we have. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to show my grid. There's a show grid option here at the bottom. When I show the grid, then I can see how things are lining up. So now we need to fix any kind of what we call barrel or pincushion distortion. Sometimes a photo suffers from what's called a barrel distortion, and that's where the images sort of bulge out from the center. Sometimes you call it like a fisheye. And so it looks like it's being wrapped around a sphere or a ball. Pincushion distortion is the opposite, where it looks like everything is pinched in towards the center, like someone punched it and pushed it in. So not all of your pictures are going to have these kind of issues, but that's why it's good if they do to fix it, and that's what this keystoning is going to do. So there's a couple of ways that we can fix these distortions. There's a remove distortion tool. Again, the top tool on the left, right over here. And this tool I need to drag with. So if I click on the tool, then I'm going to click and drag inside the image with my mouse. If I drag towards the center, look at that. It corrects any of that barrel distortion. If I click and drag, I still have my mouse down. If I click and drag away from the center, it's going to fix the pincushioning, but in this case, it made it be a barrel distortion. So there's a happy medium, and I haven't let up on my mouse yet. Having the grids active allows me to see exactly what's happening and how things are lining up. Okay, so if I look at my graphic here, you can see that things are kind of getting lined up there. So that's a way that we can correct the pincushion or the barrel distortion. We also have a remove distortion under custom. So when I click the custom tab here, remove distortion, see how I'm slightly over here? This does the exact same thing. And here we're going to go so far as we're kind of backing it out. So this is a great way. If you're not comfortable with dragging with the tool, you can use this slider right here. So now we've removed that distortion, and we found that grid really helpful. We're going to go ahead and remove the second type of distortion. Remember with the remove distortion that 0 is my center value. So if I need to reset it, I don't have to go and reset all the way back to what I started with by pulling down that option or the Alt key. I can just bring the slider back to 0. So now we need to play with the vertical perspective slider to correct the keystoning. So we fixed the distortions, we're on to keystoning. So near the bottom of the column on the right, over here, we have what's called a vertical perspective. Here it is. You notice I get a scrubby slider also on it. This is horizontal, this is the vertical. So we need to correct our keystone problem, and we're going to do that by taking this vertical perspective slider and either go left or right with it. For images where the buildings look like it's leaning backwards, which is my case right now, we're going to want to drag that slider to the left. And as you do, you're going to see that things start tilting forward. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm clicking and I'm dragging. I'm using the scrubby slider. You can use the arrow as well. Do you see how my building is starting to go up and down? It's like I'm putting it back up. I'm looking at my grid again, and I'm looking at that column. I'm looking at my windows to try to see if I've gotten this correct. So it's a lot of your own personal preference and how your eye sees it. So if you think it's correct, then you've got it. If you need to move the grid around, we can do that, and that might be helpful with the building as well. So I can also change the grid size. If we have a slider down here, we can change the size to something much smaller, or larger. So if we go a little bit smaller, we get more cells in our grid, which may make it easier to see. To move the grid around, we have a tool, third one down, and I can click and drag as to line things up. So I'm going to line it on pieces of the building here. So now by tilting the image forward, we may have created some issues on the side. I'm going to zoom out just a bit. In my case, I don't see too much of it happening, but in some cases, when you are zoomed in, let me drag to the side here, we end up with some transparency issues because we create a blank space along either the bottom or on the side while we were fixing the distortions and the keystoning. So if we do, there's an edge option, the bottom of the right column. It's below the vertical perspective. Here it is. If I zoom out, you can see how this actually has sort of bent and twisted my picture. So by zooming in, I can play with the edge there to make sure that we're looking at it correctly. And this will tell us where our images need to be cropped. I can also crop these once I exit out of this lens correction dialog box and get back into Photoshop. So when I'm done with this editing, I'm going to go a little bit more in here. Once I'm done, I can then go ahead and click OK. And I'm back into Photoshop with my building sitting up and down. So if I turn the bottom one on here, you can see it went from this to this. If I need to, I can use the transformation controls, Control T. If I need to do any kind of scaling, be cautious of stretching your picture though. Always do this in proportion. And the last thing I can do, I'll check out of this, is I can crop it. So by using the crop tool, I'm going to turn off my original here that's on the bottom so I can see. I may need to crop this. Oh, and I have a preset. I need to clear this so I can just have my crop be the size that I want it to be. And again, you're thinking about rule of thirds, which Photoshop conveniently gives you here. But we want to crop off this transparent area. So when I'm done, I click OK, and there's my new picture. So I've corrected the distortions and I've corrected the keystoning.